We'll be exploring the phenomenon of sexual signaling using self-handicapping by beginning with how this phenomenon manifests first within life forms other than human in, uh, in nature, and then we'll proceed and explore how the same phenomenon expresses itself within the human species. The most well-known example would be the peacock, the peacock tail. Here we have an evolution of an instrument function, which is then which then develops into disproportionate ways which inhibit the original function. For instance, the peacock's tail evolved to help the organism in its fight and flight grows to such an extent proportional to the organism itself that it actually inhibits the fight and flight efficiency of the organism. In this case, the male is signaling with this handicap two females and two males of its own kind, because species outside the peacock family will not understand. Each symbol is specific to the species, and this is a very important point because it will be brought up later on. The peacock signal is twofold. On the first level, it signals with its self-handicapping how much of a burden it can bear and still survive. It's saying to the females, look how much I can take and still be alive. That's the first level of communication. On the second level of communication, it's the tail itself, its symmetry, because in the cosmos, order is hard to come by and hard to maintain. Any exhibition of order is attractive, is an indication of health. So the tail, although disproportionate to the mass of the bird, is evaluated in proportion to itself, its dimensions, its coloration, how many eyes, how many feathers it has, its symmetry. So though it's asymmetrical in relation to the bird itself, making it a handicap, it is also evaluated in relation to itself, its symmetry, its aesthetic appeal. That's the first example, the most well known. The other examples would be another example of self-handicapping as a signal. It can be found in such species as the red deer, with the males disproportionate to body mass antlers, or the bighorn goat. Here again we have a tool evolved to facilitate survival, defend the organism against predators, or to harvest nutrients from the ground, from trees or whatever, growing to such a proportion as to handicap the original intent, to inhibit the original intent. So the antlers are disproportionate to the function, the original function, which now become a handicap for the male. They're really a way of signaling to members of its own species, and not really a signal that will affect any other species or the world in any way or in any big way. That's the other two examples. The third, which is the more relevant to the human, would be the example of the songbird. Now here the songbird, the male, displays its virility by learning the songs from other males, by listening to other males. And then the bird will add his own creativity to it, his own tweaks, his own elements to the song. Now the song itself is self-handicapping because it doesn't only signal to members of its own species, but it also makes itself known to predators that might be in the vicinity. So it decreases its survivability in the attempt to display its virility. Seems like a self-contradiction if you don't understand how sexuality is really a form of madness which usurps the primal, the first motive, which is survival. So this is more, will factor in more into our understanding of how self-handicapping works with humans. So with humans, the first, we'll start with the most base example of self-handicapping ornamentation, and that would be ornaments themselves. For instance, the most basic ones would be jewelry or necklaces, which have no effect on survival. They don't. The other organisms don't are not affected by these ornaments. Their intent was to signal to members of your own tribe, your own species, your quality. It says this is how much I can waste. This is how much energy I can waste on myself and still survive. The most modern example of this would be the purchase of sports cars. Now here, the most practical mind will purchase a cheaper, more efficient, more effective for a job vehicle. But that's not the intent of a sports car. The sports car is intentionally impractical, and it's priced beyond the range of most men because it has to be a burden not most men can bear. It's signaling that the male can waste resources on something impractical, inefficient, ineffective. That's the first signaling, similar to the peacock. The secondary signaling, again similar to the peacock, is on a very aesthetic level. It's saying this is how much order I can appreciate. This is my aesthetic taste, and it uses other males as a proxy. The same way a hunter might wear the skins of a lion, let's say, or put feathers from other birds to ornament himself, sending signals to his own kind. The car uses the creative genius of other males to exhibit his own, and he might later, like the bird, tweak this, add his own knickknacks, his own additions to make it more personal. But he can't produce it like the peacock out of himself, so he purchases it from other males who can. And again, the signaling is the same. The signaling remains constant throughout the species. First is a signal to other males of status and to the females saying this is how many resources I can waste and still survive. And the second is, again, it's the appeal, the aesthetic appeal of the ornament itself to itself. So, although, like the peacock's tail, although it's disproportionate to the peacock's form, body, it is symmetrical in itself, in reference to itself. Same thing with the sports car. Although it's hyperbolic, it's exceptional, it's extraordinary in relation to the individual who's displaying his self-handicapping, nevertheless has to maintain symmetry in reference to itself, a beauty, which is also attractive. Which brings us to the third category. So each signaling is directed to a specific audience, right? Depending who you want to attract, you use the appropriate signaling. So with humans, we can bridge, because we're masters in abstraction, we can appropriate different signaling techniques. That's where we can use sound, music, we can use feathers, we can use horns, and so on. So now we come to the intellectual self-handicapping. Here the competition is over who can create the most self-referentially harmonious, balanced worldview, ideology, philosophy, as an exhibit of internal uh, structure, ordering, while at the same time so extraordinary, so useless in the world as to be a self-handicap, which says this is how much brain power and time I can waste on trivialities, on symbolisms, on ideas which have no usage outside of human context. Again, with, just like with the songbird, the male, this time the human, takes a pre-existing idea and then tweaks it, makes it more personal. He may change the words around, alter the metaphors to make it more appealing. This is where he risks again failure. He takes something that's tried and tested, and he adds something that might contradict this success. So he wants to appeal to an intellectual female, to an intellectual audience. So he takes an idea, he borrows it, he plagiarizes it, tweaks it to make it his own. And then with this idea, he exhibits his self-handicapping. So this idea should be so extraordinary, so supernatural, so uh, surreal, as to have no application outside human context, human social, economic, mimetic environments, to the point where it might even be detrimental. As an example, let's use Christianity. If Christianity were to be applied to the letter of its law outside of human context, all the people would die who followed it religiously. In order for Christianity to survive, it has to contradict itself. This is an aspect of this kind of ornamentation and of the function of nihilism, which I've gone into in another video. I'm not going to get into it here. So the ideology that the males compete, philosophies that they compete with, have no usage outside signaling to other members of their own kind their qualities. First, how much they can waste, how many resources they can waste with these extraordinary ornaments which have no practical usage. And second, by the symmetry of the constructs themselves, right? Like paintings. If it's a painting of a realistic painting, then you can say it connects to the real world. But if it's something like cubism or surrealism, that's practically useless, other than as a signal of excess, of how much I can, again, how much wealth I can splurge, I can waste, how much excess I have. But the art form itself has to be symmetrical in itself, within its own context. That's the second signaling, right? The first is excess, self-handicapping, and the second is this is what comes out of me, the order that I have inside of me, which might be completely useless in the world because it's not challenged by the world. It's a total abstraction. It's disconnected from reality. So it enjoys the protection of being theoretical. The only difference between the examples I gave of self-handicapping in the natural world and examples of it in the human world is again human sheltering. Although species in the wild will suffer the consequences of this self-handicapping, the costs and the benefits, the full breadth of them. With humans, it's not so. They are protected from their own weaknesses. Mutations that are unfit are protected, allowed to propagate. What this does is it makes self-handicapping even more extraordinary, even more surreal, even more supernatural the mind now can delve into any hyperbole, any absurdity as a display of how much excess, how much time it can waste, how many trying to outcompete uh, other males. So it's like a sperm warfare. One tries to outdo the other in excess in how much they can waste, how much of themselves, how much they can risk, which is not really a risk because they're protected. And on the second level, of course, again, how much this absurdity can still remain true to its own principles, its own context. It's not self-contradictory, and that's in brief examples of signaling to the opposite sex using self-handicapping.